Hi all and welcome to week 6. My name is Liz Clarke and I will be discussing Environmental Impact Assessment or EIA theory and methodology. I will be focusing on the Australian context and in particular will utilise a case study of an EIA process for an expansion of a Queensland coal mine to explain the steps involved in EIA. The concept of EIA was influenced by increasing awareness and concerns about pollution, public health and the natural environment. The EIA process is considered to be a very valuable decision support tool for major projects that include multiple jurisdictions, various levels of complexity, higher economic stakes and high public interest. While there are multiple stages within an EIA process, the two key outputs are an Environmental Impact Statement or EIS and an assessment report. I will discuss these in more detail later on in the presentation. The EIA process is primarily based on detailed conceptual planning of a major project that identifies risks to the social ecological environment and how such risks can be avoided, managed and/or mitigated. It is important to note that detailed design is a process that will be dealt with after the EIA process is finalised. The EIS compiles all information relevant to the proposed project across a number of different fields. The process is truly multidisciplinary. Two key purposes of the project are to assist the proponent with deciding whether or not the project is viable and for the decision makers to determine whether or not the project can proceed. It provides the following evaluation criteria to review the operation of an EIA process, which is useful to understand the reasoning behind the purpose, its framework, and what makes a project successful. These evaluation criteria are as follows: to ensure that adequate environmental information is available to decision makers, to ensure that environmental factors are taken into account in decision making, to coordinate decision making between agencies, to coordinate policies on environmental aspects of decisions between nation states, to ensure adequate environmental management over the life of the project, to include the public in all stages of EIA, and to minimise costs and maximise benefits of approval processes. The EIA process assesses impacts during both the construction and operational phases of the proposed project. This also includes cumulative impacts, considerations of the range of spatial and temporal scales associated with the activities, and management and mitigation measures based on best practice measures. For projects that have a defined life, the EIA also assesses and includes measures associated with rehabilitation and post-closure care. Considering the evaluation criteria mentioned previously, key components of an EIA process are to define and refine the project scope based on feedback provided by stakeholders. Stakeholders may include members of the public, non-government organisations, for example, green groups and natural resource groups, directly affected landholders, competitors, and administering authorities. The flagging of issues and potential project stoppers early can save on considerable financial costs for the proponent. The proponent may then choose to commence discussions for compensation agreements with directly affected stakeholders, investigate alternative management and mitigation measures, revise the project footprint and/or scope, or abandon the project completely. The proponent must also demonstrate through the EIS that they have considered alternative options and that the proposed option is the most feasible. Public participation and social learning are imperative to a successful EIA process. Members of the public who may not ordinarily be provided with a statutory opportunity to participate are provided with an opportunity to present their concerns, recommendations, or support for the project. However, community members can often feel excluded as they may not have the technical knowledge or understanding to thoroughly participate in the process. Gaining access to expert knowledge and advice may be costly. On the other hand, if a proponent is committed to including community members from early on in the process, this can make them feel adequately represented, valued, and can lead to capacity building. The opening up of communication channels, building relationships and rapport, can also increase public understanding of social ecological issues associated with the project, which can then lead to a greater level of community support. An example of a recent EIA process is the Anglo-American Callide Mine Boundary Hill South project in central Queensland. Within Queensland, an EIA process can be delivered through a project being determined a coordinated project under the State Development and Public Works Organisation Act, or if it triggers criteria or is submitted voluntarily under the Environmental Protection Act 1994 or EP Act, or if it is a controlled action under the Commonwealth's Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act or EPBC Act. In this case, the proponent elected a voluntary EIA process under the EP Act for this project. The Boundary Hill South project proposes to expand the currently operational Callide coal mine by adding 2 new mining leases that include a new pit, overburden dumps and water management activities. The Queensland Department of Environment and Heritage Protection, or EHP, is the administering authority for the EIA under the EP Act and was responsible for coordinating the project throughout all of the legislative stages. A broad overview of the stages that occurred for the Boundary Hill South EIA process included the following. First, an application and initial advice statement for voluntary EIS was submitted in October 2011. EHP then approved the voluntary EIS to proceed. The Australian Government then declared the project to be a controlled action under the EPBC Act. Despite this, EHP was still responsible for coordinating the project through a bilateral agreement. A Terms of Reference is the key document within the EIA process as it outlines all of the matters that the proponent must address within the EIS. The draft Terms of Reference and the final Terms of Reference for the project was reviewed by a number of state agencies and the Australian Government. The Terms of Reference was subsequently approved after the proponent addressed the recommendations made. The proponent submitted the EIS to EHP in November 2013. The EIS included a summary document explaining the project, the potential impact, and management and mitigation measures. Technical reports were included as attachments and included a range of fields including noise, air, surface water, groundwater, waste, geotechnical assessments, hazards, health and safety, socioeconomic, and so on. Submissions made by stakeholders, which included government agencies, non-government organisations, local businesses, community members, and potentially affected landholders, identified general concerns along with inadequate information in terms of addressing the Terms of Reference and legislative considerations. The proponent was then required to submit a number of EIS addendums, which are also sometimes called supplementary EISs, before the EIS had to legally proceed. Following on from the above, in March 2016, EHP decided that the EIS was allowed to proceed under the EP Act. In April 2016, EHP issued the EIS Assessment Report, which approved the EIS and marked the completion of the EIS process. The EIS Assessment Report summarised the findings of the EIS and made various recommendations for future approvals. Multiple public notification, submission, and community consultation processes occurred throughout the entire process. As mentioned previously, an EIA process is a valuable decision-making support tool. However, it does not provide a finite approval for a project. Therefore, it is important to note that while the Boundary Hill South EIA process is now complete, the project is not legally approved to proceed. The proponent is required to obtain 8 approvals under various pieces of state and federal legislation in order for land use approval and construction and operational activities to occur. The EIS Assessment Report also noted that while the Terms of Reference has been met, there are a number of matters that still need to be addressed by the proponent through the additional approvals processes. Such include biodiversity offsets under the EPB and addressing how the site will be appropriately rehabilitated. Based on the above, it can be reasonably concluded that this process has adequately met the evaluation criteria as presented by Elliott. In summary, This presentation has provided an overview of the key purposes of EIA and the value that such a process can have for all stakeholders. The Boundary Hill South Project EIS was used as an example to portray the various steps in an EIA process, and also the stages that occur after the process is complete. I hope that you are now more familiar with the EIA process, and I look forward to this week's discussion.